How do you build a high-performing culture? This is Culture Architects. Candid conversations with extraordinary leaders sharing their biggest successes, failures, and lessons learned on their culture journeys. Here's David J. Friedman.
So on March 15th of 1982, Zingerman's Delicatessen opened in Ann Arbor, Michigan, with just 2 people and 1,300 square feet of store space and a really modest menu. And in the next 4 decades, the deli would cement its place in Ann Arbor staple, rejecting the typical franchise model for food retailers and instead growing into what today is known as Zingerman's community of businesses. As early as 2003, Inc. magazine called it, quote, the coolest small company in America. That's pretty cool. The recipe for their Reuben sandwich may have stayed the same since their very first day in 1982, but Zingerman's, the company itself, has evolved in so many different ways. And in today's episode of Culture Architects, we're sitting down with one of Zingerman's co-founders, Ari Weinzweig, to talk about this incredible journey that he's had. Not only is Ari among the people that steered the company toward industry recognition, but he's become a real thought leader on values-driven business and intentional, inclusive cultures, with a reach that today extends way beyond just the streets of Ann Arbor. So, Ari, it is an absolute honor to have you on the show. Welcome to the Culture Architects podcast.
Thank you, David. That was a very lovely intro.
Well, you know, I know you've told this story lots of times, probably till you're sick of telling it, but for the sake of our audience, just the quick story of, you know, you went to University of Michigan, you were studying Russian history.
And how you go from good.
How do you go from studying Russian history to open a delicatessen? That's a little different. So give us the quick version of that story.
I don't mind telling it. There's we might get to it later, but there's an essay in the first book I wrote called Natural Laws of Business, which is my belief that, like gravity, these natural laws are just true for any organization, whether it's a basketball team or an architectural firm or a 8th grade class or a restaurant or whatever. And the 9th one on the list, they're not hierarchically ranked, but the 9th one on the list is that success means you get better problems. So the fact that people are still asking me to tell this story 43 years later is a really good problem, and far better than what most people would have, which is either nobody cared about their story, or worse still, we did a lot of really bad things and I was trying to get out of it. So anyway, the story, yes, I'm from Chicago. I came here to Ann Arbor to go to school. For people who aren't familiar with the geography of this part of the world, Ann Arbor's about a 4-hour drive up I-94 to the east of Ann Arbor and an hour west of Detroit. East of Chicago and an hour west of Detroit. I studied Russian history, as you said. I also studied anarchism. And I write a lot about the application of anarchism to modern organization. They don't promote it in their fundraising materials, but University of Michigan has the largest anarchist collection in the country. And I used to go up there and study when I was in school, and then since later went back and studied more as a business owner. But anyway, after graduating with my history degree, there isn't anything one can really do with a history degree except go get more degrees, which is what I was supposed to do. But I wasn't quite ready for that, and I had no clue what the next degree would be in. So I decided I would stay here in Ann Arbor. We do a lot of work, and I'm sure it'll come up around the idea of visioning and the process that we use. But when I graduated, I had no vision at all. Only what David Whyte, Whyte, you may well know his work, his poetry, and his writing. He calls it the via negativa. This is where you're clueless about where you want to go, but you're super clear where you don't want to go. And I knew I didn't want to go back home. And in order to not go home, even though I was only a history major, I knew I needed money in order to pay rent. And I had driven a taxi part-time while I was in school, which was perfectly fine, but not all that interesting. One of my college roommates was waiting tables at a restaurant in downtown Ann Arbor. For people who've never been here, there's only about 100,000 people in the town. So you're rarely more than 15 minutes from anything else. But anyway, I thought, all right, well, he seems to like that job. So I'll go and talk to him, interview over there and see if I can get the same job he's got. And then I applied for a job as a server. We had a nice conversation. They said they'd call me. I thought, all right, cool, this is going to work out. But then after 2 weeks, they hadn't called. So I was like, all right, I'm getting nervous. I don't want to take a chance. I'm going to go back. I'll reapply as a busboy. And once again, nice conversation. Once again, they said they'd call. Once again, 2 more weeks, no call. Then I was like, all right, now I'm getting in trouble. The rent's going to come due. So I went back a third time, which I now know is called emotional resilience. And I reapplied and I said, hey, I'll do anything. Like, I really got to work. And they said, do you want to wash dishes? And never having worked in food before, I didn't know you weren't supposed to want to wash dishes. So I just said, yeah, that sounds awesome. And, they said, great. Can you start tomorrow? I was absolutely. And that's how I started. So I really just lucked out by stumbling into work that I really love and also into great people. Paul Goodman, another nice Jewish boy who went to school and then actually did go get graduate degrees. And he has a line that says, having a vocation is like falling in love, and it works out. And that's really what happened to me. And everybody listening to this has fallen in love many times, not just with people, but ideas, with projects, with concepts, with ideologies or a book or whatever. And it doesn't work out. But in this case, it worked out. I would love to tell you that from the time I was like 10 that I love food and cooking, and this is my lifelong passion. And my mother was this amazing cook, and all the deli recipes came from her. But none of that is true. My mother.
That's right. You can make it up.
You can, but we're going to try to be on the high level here in your Culture Architects podcast. But anyway, she was a good person and a teacher for decades, but not a great cook. I grew up on the typical industrial American diet, which I realize now they still sell. I just stopped buying it. But Kraft macaroni and cheese, Pop-Tarts, cinnamon sugar frosted were my favorite. Fruit Loops, fish sticks from Mrs. Paul's, tuna pot pies, Tang, High C, Hawaiian Punch, green Jello with pears. I mean, it wasn't really like the most culinarily inspiring background. And also, nobody in my family was in business. They were all teachers, doctors, lawyers, dentists, psychologists. So I was like the failure of the family. And to be honest, I didn't even know business was like on a menu of life options one could choose from. It just seemed like business was like General Motors and really was not anything I was remotely interested in. So I just lucked out. I mean, I stumbled, as I said, into work that I really love. I'm still super motivated by the cooking all these years later, and by trying to learn more about the food, figure out how to make the food better all the time. Just, the most amazing little things. In fact, I'm holding a little bread end of what we call Roadhouse bread, which was the old bread of New England from the 17th, 18th, and 19th century. They used to call it thirded bread. It's rye, wheat, and corn. And the Europeans, when they came, always wanted to grow wheat, at least the English. And of course, it didn't grow in the cold climate of New England. And they finally succumbed to nature. A battle people are still trying to outwit nature, much to our frustration. But anyway, they finally gave in and started to grow rye, which grows better in the cold, and used corn, which was the native grain. And it's one of my favorite breads, and it's one we've been making for 22 years. I happen to be sitting at the Roadhouse right now, so we made it for when we opened this 22 years ago. And like so many things, it's gotten better and better because we've started to source more local grains and mill a lot of those grains at the bakehouse. So, and then the dark crusts are the best because natural caramelization from the Maillard effect makes them even better. So anyway, this tiny little crust of bread is awesome and inspiring. So I also met great people. So Paul Saginaw was the general manager at that restaurant. His first day was my first day. Frank Carollo, who became our partner at our bakehouse many years later, was a line cook. And Maggie Bayless, who many years later became the partner at Zing Train, our training business, started the next year as a cocktail waitress. So to wrap this up, I started prepping and started line cooking. I have a new chapbook out called Life Lessons I Learned from Being a Line Cook. And I started managing kitchens. I stayed and worked for that restaurant group for about 4 years. Paul left about halfway through that to open a very excellent little fish market here in town, which is still there. Fall of 1981, I reached a point that is probably not unfamiliar to many of the people listening, which is my job was fine. Like, it was perfect. The pay was fine. The people were pleasant. I mean, there was nothing like bad about it, but it was less and less fulfilling. And although they didn't write a vision the way we do, I could sense where they were going was not where I wanted to go. So I was like, you know what, time to do something else. So I gave 2 months notice with no clue what was next. And one of those nice life stories that worked out. Paul called me 2 days later and said there was this little building coming open near the fish market. It's the one you described in your lovely intro. And somehow within a week, we decided we were going to open, since today it takes like 6 months to get a meeting set up when everybody's in town. But within like a week, we decided we would open. And then 4.5 months later, on Monday, March 15th, as you described so nicely, we opened.
So it still seems like a bit of a leap, not even a bit, it's a significant leap to go from, okay, you're working at this restaurant for 4 years, you decide it's not, it's not fulfilling for me anymore.
Well, I love the food, just
yeah.
not,
All right. So you love the food part of it, but to have the guts then to say, we're going to start something new. Like, what gave you the courage to do that?
I think Paul is more instinctively inclined in that direction. For me at the time, it was far less stressful because I'd already given notice. So I was only 7.5 weeks from being unemployed. So there was, the risk seemed a lot lower. And, we're often called entrepreneurs. I like the opening of the new chapbook, Life Lessons I Learned from Being a Line Cook, tells the truth, which is that I never think of myself as an entrepreneur. I still think of myself just as a line cook that's doing pretty well. And our idea of opening was never like, how do we make the most money? It was, really it was how to create good work for ourselves. And of course, money is a meaningful piece of that. It's easier to live when you have it. And I'm not down on it, but
sure,
we didn't go like, how do we maximize the money? Oh, let's open a deli. It was like, here's the work we want to do. Let's figure out how to make it financially viable.
Yeah. So somewhere early on, so you start, it's just a couple of people, 1,300 square feet, and somewhere along the way, and you've got 700 people now in a community of businesses. Somewhere along that path, you had this recognition that I'll use the word culture since this is Culture Architects podcast, but you had this recognition that the people part of this business had a significant influence. Like, what is it that tuned you into that? Where was that recognition?
Well, I think that we knew it from the beginning. It was always our intention to make a great place for people to work. We knew a lot less, which is good. 43 years later, we actually learned something, but I think just, we always wanted it to be a good place for people to work. Over time, it became clear that work was as important as the food. And then over time, even more time, it became clear to me that systems design and the construct of the organization itself is as much a creative act in this context of architecture, as much a creative act as cooking, and that a beautifully, elegantly designed organization is a work of art, and not so much a work of art in the context of something hanging in the Louvre that never changes, but more a work of art in the context of an amazing small farm or garden that's like an ecosystem. It's still evolving every day, but if you do that work, every once in a while, you take 19 seconds to just stop, go like, man, look at this.
It's pretty good.
Knowing that tomorrow 63 things will be wrong, at some insect might, invade your plants, or that it'll be too much rain or too much sun or whatever goes wrong. And it's the same in business. It's nothing that we've done can't come apart relatively quickly. Nothing is given. Other than an opportunity, if we do our job well today, to come back tomorrow and do it again, and that was true in 82 and it's true now. But,
So I want to go back, sort of zoom out a little bit. And you talked about, and I know you've written and talked extensively over time about anarchy. And most people's misunderstanding of anarchy has to do with, we're anti-government or something. And you have a completely different point of view about what anarchy is and its role in people development and in business. So talk a little bit more about what is anarchy and why is that so important a concept?
I typically use the term anarchism as opposed to anarchy, although they're not, you're not wrong to say it. It's just,
all right, let's use it.
People are less less likely to confuse it when I say
Yeah, makes
anarchism.
sense.
The common conception of anarchism is that it's chaos and rock throwing and violence, and I would suggest that's actually the mid 19th century Russian stream of philosophy called nihilism, which is mostly just destroy. Anarchism is, as Alexander Berkman, the early or late 19th, early 20th century Lithuanian Jewish immigrant to the U.S. anarchist, said, it's basically, I'm paraphrasing, I could find you the exact quote, but he basically said it's actually the opposite of all that. So, and I agree with him. So what it really is it's about human dignity. It's about positive beliefs in people. It's about the belief that people will default to mostly doing the right thing, even though you and I and everybody else has done some things wrong. It's that they're not trying to do things wrong. It's all about organization. So it's not about chaos. It's the opposite of chaos. It's just about involving the people of the organization in designing the organization of which they're a part, as opposed to the hierarchical model, which would call on you and me as the bosses to figure it out for them and impose it on them and make all the decisions at the top. This is a way of being in a world that's not thinking hierarchically. This is what I just wrote about for my e-news this week, which means to stop ranking everything, stop looking for the top things, stop worrying about the worst problem and the best success, and start to just treat every person and everything as if it matters. And for me, that's what anarchism is. So, to be clear, there's thousands of definitions of all subjects. Anarchism is the last one that anyone, let alone me, should try to impose their own definition on others. So I'm not here to say I got it down. These are just lessons that I've learned from it. And the not thinking hierarchically, which I mentioned that I'm just writing about this week, so it's fresh in my mind, but it's really endemic. It's so much the norm. It's like that anecdote, I'm sure you've seen it, of the two fish are swimming along and they're talking about another fish, and the one fish says, well, yeah, man, he's like a fish out of water, and the other one goes, what's water? And I think that's my belief, is that's pretty much true of hierarchical thinking. Like, people don't even realize they're doing it because it's so ingrained in the belief system that we're raised with. But whatever, I'm exaggerating maybe, but not much. Every other article is like the top 5 tips, or the 7 things to do for leaders.
Everywhere. Absolutely.
The biggest mistake LeBron James ever made. Who's the greatest player of all time? Like, why does it really matter? Like, and so this is really just about treating the new bus boy or bus person as if they matter as much as you do. It's, being honored when President Obama came to lunch, but being just as honored when, I don't know, some high school student walks over to spend $10, so it's, and then also of not, like when people ask me, when I get interviewed, you haven't done it, so I'm not talking about you, but people that interview me regularly, and then a common question, or when I speak, which I also do regularly, a common question is like, well, if you just had like one piece of advice, or what's the one thing every entrepreneur should know? And I used to try to explain to them about hierarchical thinking, but eventually at some point I landed on the much wiser strategy, which is to just answer the one thing, is to stop looking for the one thing.
Yeah.
So that's what anarchism. So I'm not here to say we're an anarchist organization, other than like 2 other people of the 700. Most people won't even have much to say about it.
But it influences the way you. But
it's influenced the way that I think. It's a worldview. One of the big ahas for me when I started to restudy it 30 years after I finished school, which is really where this came from, not from what I did in school that laid the foundation, but it was really like around 15 years ago that I started to really understand the applications of it. And that came from Deborah Dash Moore, who I actually just emailed this morning, who's now retired, the head of the Jewish Studies Department, asked me to speak there. And I, was already speaking regularly at business conferences. And when I would give my history, as I did with you, and it would come up that I had studied anarchism, and mostly at business conferences, they all have the negative beliefs that you appropriately, shared. And so they chuckle nervously, like, it's an anarchy, and that was the end of it. They don't ask about it. It goes away. But then, when she wanted me to talk, she goes, well, I just written this like 10,000 word essay on the history of Jewish rye bread. So She goes, oh, I want to call it Anarchism on Rye, because she knew I had studied it. And I was like, yeah, it sounds cute, go for it. And as is often the case in academia, she booked me to do this like in the fall of one year for September of the next year. So I was like, whatever. But then when I got like 3 months out, it's hit me like, damn, man, like at business conferences, nobody knows who any of these people were, but at Jewish studies, they've studied these people like at a high academic level. I'm going to look like an idiot because I haven't looked at these books in decades, so I got all my old books out and I started to restudy, and it really blew my mind because which is what you just alluded to, although we hadn't thought of it that way, it's so much of what Paul and I had created, and this was already, 25 years into our business, was very aligned with a lot of the philosophies that I had studied, even though we didn't think of it that way. It's what happened. And then B, so much of what they were writing about in 1900 is now called progressive business. And so if you think of like flattening hierarchies, self-organizing work teams, employee engagement, purpose, like these are all implicit in anarchist philosophies. And a lot of their work was a reaction to the dehumanization of the Industrial Revolution, which is still the problem today. And part of what I would suggest goes wrong in a lot of organizations is people adopt those approaches because they believe it's going to help them. Like the person who goes on, you and I both run, but the doctor tells them they need to start exercising. So they run 12 times and then they are busy and then they don't, and then they feel bad and then they go down a path and never go again. This is really, for us, it's coming from a deeper philosophical place. And the last thing I'll say, and we can go to whatever else you want, obviously, but so Gustav Landauer was a very interesting anarchist thinker, German Jewish pacifist, late 19th, early 20th century, who was kicked to death by the German army in a overthrow of the very short-lived liberal post-World War I government in a sort of German version of January 6th, where they actually took power. Anyway, but his work was not available to me, accessible to me when I was in school because it was still only in German. But in the intervening years, it was translated by a guy named Gabriel Kuhn into English. So when I went back 15 years ago, it was all there to read, and it was awesome. And I learned many things from him. And one of them is he said, we have no political beliefs. We have beliefs against politics. So believe me, I encourage everybody listening to vote and participate in American society. I'm working on a new pamphlet on democracy. But that said, anarchism is really not a political belief system. It's a human way of dealing with each other. And as the anarchist that I like to study would say, it starts with how I treat you, how I treat myself, how I treat, there was I'm not saying I'm so great, but just, I'm guessing unhomed person, wandered onto the Roadhouse patio this morning and started smoking a cigarette. Of course, it's a restaurant and we're in the 21st century. So I politely asked him not to smoke. 10 minutes later, he came back, and I was like, can I help you? Try to treat him like with dignity. I don't know. And he said, I'm just waiting for the manager. And I'm like, okay, it's a funny place to wait for the manager, but anyway, I said, well, how can I help you? And he said, well, I'm waiting to find out about a job. I want to apply for a job. So I told him how to do it online and he said he could do it on his phone. And then, challenging myself to act on all this stuff. I said, do you want a cup of coffee for the road? It's a small thing, but, and I'm not saying I'm so great. It's just, for me, that's an example of what anarchism is at a very basic level.
I remember that you had talked in one of your, whether it was a podcast, one of your writings, about when you came across in your history at Zingerman's, you came across the whole idea of open book management, which was very similar to my own experience. I had, like you, back in the 90s, I had read Jack Stack's Great Game of Business. And when I read it, it just made sense. Like, well, why wouldn't you do that? It seems like a pretty obvious thing to do. And talk more about when you took that on. And it seems like that's consistent with your basic philosophy of this. Yeah.
So I'll lead into it with a little bit about beliefs. So I wrote a giant book. The chapbook is like this tiny little 50-page, small pages, little espresso shot. But I also wrote one of the books I wrote is called Power of Beliefs in Business, and it's like 600 pages. So it's a big tome. And it's really this we can get into the details of it later if you want, but it was really around actually not long after the anarchist studies began a few years later, I had a similar aha about beliefs, which came from reading Bob and Judith Wright's book, Transformed. I had known them from some other stuff earlier in my life. They had run the Wright Institute in Chicago. And then there was this little belief cycle, self-fulfilling belief cycle, which I had never seen. And it really blew my mind. And I realized I had never given an iota of thought to the impact that our beliefs have. And obviously I knew they existed, but I just really didn't understand the power they were having in terms of how much they're self-fulfilling, and that they're not genetic, and that they're all learned, and that they can be changed, et cetera, et cetera. And anyway, long story short, the work, the studying began, and the long book came out. And part of what we've done over the years here that has helped us, I think, a lot is to create, so standard operating procedures are a great thing in the right setting, which is where it's a repeatable task with no variation. So if you're flying on next Friday, you definitely want the pilot to use the flight safety checklist. If you're having surgery, next Tuesday, you really want the medical team to be able to use the sanitation checklist and make sure they have the right equipment and that they put the magic marker on the right leg. But many things are not appropriate for standard operating procedures. They actually require thinking. So we've long worked with what we call organizational recipes, or what Carol Sanford, who passed away in December, would call frameworks. And frameworks are different, and they honor complexity. They guide you towards a good answer and help you think about it, but you need to think about it yourself and come up with the answer.
Yes.
So connecting that with beliefs, I started to look at beliefs as the root system of our lives, metaphorically. Nobody's thinking, or hardly anybody's thinking about them. They're all arguing over the action, but the action is always driven by the belief. So until you pull the root, the action's just going to come right back, right? So if you teach, classes on diversity, and people learn not to say bad words, but they still have negative beliefs about people of color, as soon as they're under pressure, they're going to just come back out again, right? Until they really change the beliefs. So I looked at beliefs as the root system. And then with that in mind, I started to look at beliefs as negative beliefs, neutral beliefs, and positive beliefs. So 3 broad categories. If beliefs are the root system, then it's implicit that negative beliefs will always create negative outcomes. Neutral beliefs don't do much. Positive beliefs create positive outcomes. So this was the frame that I was looking at. In hindsight, I had neutral beliefs about open book management. Like we weren't down on it. We just never knew you could do it.
Yeah.
So when I don't remember if I read the book first or Paul did, but one of us read it and gave it to the other one. And then it was like, yeah, why would we not want to do this?
That was my reaction.
By that point was
sense.
Like you said, in the mid 90s, there's a little bird chirping above me, which is a nice nature thing, I guess. We were already doing some kind of profit sharing attempts. We were already starting to teach classes on business finance with, some stuff in mind. But a Great Game of Business gave us, again, a framework, a structure, a recipe for using it within the organization. And I would say, like most things, it took us 4 or 5, 6 years to get pretty good at it.
Yeah.
It's one of the natural laws also, is that most doing something great takes longer than most people think.
Yeah. But it's consistent with the idea of the dignity of work, of having people understand that they can make their own decisions to drive things in the right direction. They are.
And that's why, to be honest, the other model actually makes no sense.
Yeah.
It's just the one everybody's used to, which is a great example of why people choose over and over again, choose beliefs over data. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, when I teach them, like it's like playing basketball, but only the coach knows the score and how much time is left. And they just yell at the players to play harder all the time and expect them to give 100%. It's like, doesn't make any sense. And then the fallacy of hierarchical thinking is that only the bosses are making decisions, but it's ludicrous. I mean, right now, in the 28 minutes that we've been sitting here, the host has greeted X number of people. They could have chosen to be kind of nice, really nice, super nice,
Those are all decisions they're making.
Go the extra mile. We're going to get a fire truck coming by now.
But those are all decisions that are being made at every step of the way.
Everybody's making decisions all day long. It's ludicrous to think only the bosses can make them. But hierarchical thinking leads people to set up systems and structures where essentially they have a standard operating procedure where they need a framework.
Yes.
In context.
There's a phrase that I heard that might resonate with you about that basic idea. And this has always resonated with me. I don't remember where I read this, but the author said that rules tell us what we can and cannot do, where principles tell us what we should or shouldn't do.
Yeah. I think
that's I hear that as somewhat similar to your point of view that, standard operating procedures are necessary because we're taking thought out of it. Do these things exactly this way. But there are other places where we need to set up a philosophy of how we do things. And inside of that framework, allow people to make their own decisions.
Yeah, fully agreed. And I wrote a pamphlet on food and philosophy, which is my belated glimpse of the obvious that philosophy is not a crock whatever, and that we actually need it and it's helpful and have it whether we know it or not. I guess what I would say is that the frameworks are more structured than just knowing your ethics. Right. Because I don't think there's any business that I know of where they try to give bad service.
Sure.
So even the ones that do, so the values are clear that the customer is super important, but because they have no framework for how to do it,
yes,
people are left with this, standing in front of a giant field going, I don't know where to go.
Yes.
And so the framework is intended to help. It clarifies expectations. It helps the person to actually think about it in a healthy way that is values aligned.
Yes.
But then it calls on them to develop an answer for themselves. And through that, it teaches people to think. And I would suggest one of the biggest problems in modern society, not unique to the United States, is that people have been trained not to think. And they're trained to be angry at somebody else who's thinking or to like somebody else who's thinking, but they're consumers of thinking instead of thinking. Right. And I don't mean there's no, brain activity. Clearly there is, but when people are raised to believe that they're going to get the answer from some mythical boss, they don't think for themselves. And so they're just, it's like latching on to the latest diet fad or whatever, the latest leadership diet fad. It's not going to work because it's not coming from the inside out. And conversely, when you have an organization like ours, which is totally imperfect and we mess up every 15 minutes, if not more, but we're teaching people to think. So when somebody's worked here for 2 years, they're going to leave here with an ability to process, to abstract, to come to good conclusions. And, it's not something I think we fully understood at all in the beginning, but it makes better citizens. I mean, because people don't go from being free thinkers at work to following autocrats out of work, it doesn't make any sense.
And that concludes the first half of my conversation with Ari Weinzweig, co-founder and co-owner of Zingerman's. When we resume on the next episode of Culture Architects, Ari's going to weigh in on the sometimes controversial question of how much is too much when it comes to articulating your organization's behaviors, or as we call them, fundamentals. And he explains how their company's training arm, Zing Train, is just a natural extension of their already unique business model. We have all that and more in the next episode, so make sure you stay tuned.
This has been Culture Architects with David J. Friedman. Join us next time for more insights and wisdom from great leaders in all walks of life. To book David for your next event, or to learn more about his writing, speaking, or consulting, go to davidjfriedman.com. Culture Architects with David J. Friedman is a production of CultureWise.